Hi, I'm Diane McGarry with Drake Arts. With me today are co-host Tom McGarry, author Michael Bell, and ASL interpreter Gay. Michael is a retired state folklorist of Rhode Island. I love that title. He has a Ph.D. in folklore from Indiana University, an M.A. in folklore and mythology from the University of California at Los Angeles, and a B.A. in anthropology and archaeology from the University of Arizona, Tucson. He is the author of Vampire's Grasp, A Hidden History of Consumption in New England. Sorry, I couldn't say that normally. Michael's first vampire book, Food for the Dead, On the Trail of New England's Vampires, was a BookSense 76 pick and winner of the Lord Ruthven Assembly Award for Best Nonfiction Book on Vampires. Michael and his wife, Carole, split their time between Texas and Rhode Island. Michael, this is a very interesting topic for a book. What led you to research vampires?
Well, this is a story. It's one of those moments in your life that is indelibly etched, one that you don't forget. I mean, we forget a lot of things.
Yeah.
But this is almost like it happened yesterday.
Hmm.
It was almost 41 years ago. So it was almost 44 years ago, actually. It was in 1981, November. So that's almost exactly 44 years ago. And I was doing a project funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities to investigate and document and preserve traditional culture and cultural traditions in the southern part of Rhode Island. It's technically it's Washington County.
Mhm.
Before that, it was Kings County, but everybody's always called it South County, and that's basically what it's called. This was called the South County Project. And I was lucky to have two interns working with me. They were getting paid to help me. They were, I guess you would say, my key informants. They were local uh, people in South County, so they had a lot of contacts. And one of them said, I've set up an interview with this man, he's kind of a swamp Yankee, down in Exeter, which is in South County. And he said he's basically the unofficial town historian.
Mhm.
And he's got maps and papers and documents, and he knows just about everything about the town of Exeter. I said, Boy, that's great, Dawn. Thank you. And then she said, And be sure when we get down there to ask him about the vampire and his family. So I did a mental double take, like, whoa, what? She said, I just you'll hear the story. So, I'm like most people at that who haven't been studying vampires, we all have this idea of what a vampire is. So I count Dracula in my head from the 1932 movie, and maybe Count Orlok from the earlier movie, and also the pop culture vampires who were selling us beer and batteries and stuff like that. So anyway, I had to try to get my mind around what it was going to tell me. And then we got the address out, and I said, "This is not helping me, Don." He lives at the very end of Sodom Trail. So right away, I'm going down this little road, dirt road at the end of the trail, and I'm going to talk about this older farmer about vampires. So I get in the house,
Were there
and
bats
before,
too?
hmm?
Bats? Were there bats there and big
No, there
cobwebs?
weren't bad, but I think there were like four Saint Bernards
Oh, wow.
who came out of the house, out of the yard when I'm in this little car. I rolled down my window. I said, "Is it okay if I get out of the car?" He said, "Well, better let me get this one here." So I said, "Thank you." So we got in the house, and he had a wood stove going because it was pretty cool for that time in November. It had a cold snap, and he started in telling me right away the story of the vampire story. I barely had time to get my tape recorder out and turn it on. So in the recording, it comes in right in the middle of a sentence saying, "Brown was see, I was related to her. I don't know how, but we are related." So he went on to tell me the story. He said there was a sickness going around in the family years ago, and he said you'd have to remember they didn't have medicines. They had nothing like that back then. So they had to take care of themselves. He said, so there was this mysterious illness killing people in the family. From far away as Ohio, he said, killing brother was being killed by this thing. So he said they had to do something. And they decided, he said there were 12 men that got together in the family and they took a vote what to do. He said they voted to go out to the cemetery and dig up the bodies of the mother who had died, of George Brown's wife, the daughter, the oldest daughter, Olive, had died, and then Mercy, the young one, she had died because their brother Edwin was dying. And they thought maybe this is the only way we're going to save him. Find out if there's, he said, there's something we're responsible for, something in the grave, and it was killing the other family members. So anyway, he said they went out to the cemetery and he said there was Mercy's grave. He said they dug her up and they found fresh blood in the heart.
Mm.
He said, well, right away there was a problem. A little Yankee understatement. So he said, yeah, that's a problem. He said, well, he said, actually, she had turned over in the grave.
Oh no. Mm.
And he said, I don't know why they picked her, but there was something that led it to that, he said. So anyway, they cut her heart out and there was blood in that heart, fresh blood. He said, so they had to do something. They cut the heart out and took it to a nearby rock and burned it to ashes.
Mm.
He said, no, I don't know what they did with it. They took the ashes and done something. He said, I don't remember that stuff there. And then he said, anyway, that took care of the problem.
Wow.
Then the
So,
person got better?
well, implicitly, he says, yes, that took care of the problem. It didn't, actually.
Mm.
I mean, obviously, when I heard this story, I was impressed by a lot of things. And number one, there were some supernatural elements in there, turning over in the grave and something that led it to that and mysterious illness. So I wanted to find out, obviously, as a scholar, I wanted to find out, how much of this was based on factual things. Did this really happen? Was it just a family story, or was it based on fact, and then the story got elaborated over and changed over time? So I started doing the research, and it didn't take me long to find a newspaper article from March 19th, 1892.
Mm.
And the headline was Testing a Horrible Superstition in the Town of Exeter. Bodies of dead relatives had died of consumption, but the belief was that there was a vampire in the grave killing the family members. And then it went on to describe in great detail what had happened. And so Everett's story was basically factual. There was no mention, though, in the article of someone having turned over the grave. And I think if that had happened, they might have mentioned it. Also, the newspaper article said that Dr. Harold Metcalf, who was the medical examiner for the towns of North Kingstown and Exeter, was at the scene because the family had requested his presence to do the autopsy.
Mm.
So there was a medical doctor at the scene when these bodies were exhumed. And in fact, it wasn't just Mercy Brown who was removed. It was the mother, Mary Olive, who had died several years earlier, and then the daughter, who had died right after that. So two family members, the mother and her daughter, had already passed away. And according to the newspaper article, both of those bodies were exhumed and examined. Uh, and
But can't you
one
get
of,
diseases from corpses? I mean, isn't that why we're supposed to bury them pretty soon? And isn't that really what we used to call TB?
yes, exactly. Well, pulmonary tuberculosis. Tuberculosis can manifest itself in many different forms.
Right, right, it can.
The most common is settles in the lungs because that's where people breathe in the germs. Of course, we have to remember this is 1892. Uh, although Edward Cook, a German scientist, had announced his discovery of the tuberculosis bacterium in 10 years earlier, that word didn't get spread around. And
No,
in
yeah.
fact, in the rural areas, people didn't really know that it was a germ that was causing it. And even if they did, there was no cure for it.
Right. So it didn't really matter if you knew because,
Exactly. So, someone would go to the doctor, being sick with consumption, and the medical doctor, I think if he was honest, would say, there's nothing I can do. It's in God's hand.
yeah,
And so what are you going to do when people in your family are dying and the establishment is telling you, well, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. Well, you're going to turn to other means. And we still do that.
yeah.
Let's not forget COVID and other stuff that's been going on
Yeah.
recently. So we're no smarter than our ancestors in
Well,
the
it's just people
1800s.
grab for whatever they can
Exactly.
think of. I would
Well,
never think of digging up a grave, but
well, that was actually the more, of course, the more research I did, the more I found out that this was a widespread folk medical practice in New England.
really,
Huh.
I was not at that time. I had no clue,
Mm,
and of course, this was 1981. This is before the internet,
mm.
so I couldn't just go to newspaper archives and do keyword searches
sure, sure.
and find these things. I had to go to actual archives and look through microfilm and microfiche,
Wow.
practically going blind trying to find these
Uh,
things.
mm.
And it was a lot of it. Finding more cases was serendipity. Some of
Wow.
it was with fellow scholars who knew of this peculiar interest that I had just developed.
Mm.
Would say, "Oh, I found something that might interest you," and then they would give me a newspaper article that gave me another one of these cases, and I said,
Uh-huh.
"Oh, that's wonderful." So the upshot is, in Food for the Dead, first published 2001, the second edition in 2011. I had 20 cases, and then that up that to about 30 some in the second revised edition. Now, with Vampire's Grass, that was published last year, I'm up to almost 90
Oh, wow.
separate cases
Huh.
Wow.
throughout New England and also in places contiguous to New England. So I found 3 cases in Pennsylvania.
Mm,
Not surprisingly, these families, some of them, came from Rhode Island
mm.
because Rhode Island is the Transylvania of New England in
Oh,
terms of
wow.
vampire cases.
Oh,
Huh. Do you think it's a particular type of familial history or just, certain people are prone to certain things,
In
right? So,
terms of in terms of this belief and practice,
yeah, and the
or
cluster and calling Rhode Island Transylvania. I
oh, okay.
mean the area because there's different.
Well, I think Rhode Island is a special place. It has been since it was founded by Roger Williams.
mm.
Uh-huh.
He left he left the colony of Massachusetts for religious purposes because they were Puritans and they were not tolerant.
Huh.
And he left saying, "I want people to be free to believe what they want to believe." And so from the very beginning, Rhode Island was a colony that attracted people who didn't have orthodox beliefs. The Quakers came here, for example. They were welcomed here. They were hung in Massachusetts,
Mm.
in Boston.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so from the beginning, it was established as a place where people who did not have orthodox beliefs could still practice whatever they wanted.
Mm.
So I think the people here were already predisposed and then conditioned to accept unorthodox beliefs, what we might call a magical worldview, to allow more diversity in terms of belief. And it's interesting that, Rhode Island is one of the colonies that never prosecuted or put on trial anyone for being a witch.
Mm.
We just had vampires.
Uh,
So anyway, I think that the bottom line there is that people were more prone to accept this uh, cure,
mm.
this folk cure. And it was a folk cure. It was passed around in communities by word of mouth, by people traveling from one place to the other. I have so many good records and evidence of how this thing got spread.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I have a notion of how it actually came to New England, where it had to come from Europe. I'm convinced of that. This was not a native belief. It wasn't indigenous people didn't really have this kind of vampire belief, and it wasn't brought by African Americans or slaves. And it didn't just occur to people out
Sure,
of
it didn't
nowhere
come from
to,
nowhere.
to do this. I mean, there's a strong tradition in Europe, especially Northern and Eastern Europe, of digging up the bodies of dead relatives when there's unexplained illnesses in the community
Wow.
and looking for when this is the whole so-called vampire belief and looking for signs that this corpse is unnaturally preserved.
Huh.
Wow.
So it hasn't actually been accepted into the earth yet. So there's still some signs of life. Now in New England, the belief, it's hard to pin down exactly what it was because the people basically saw this as a folk medical practice. And they didn't really talk about, well, how could this happen? What's going on? It was just that there was some sort of evil spirit or inhabiting one of the corpses of the dead family members. So you had to find out which corpse had that evil spirit. So in like Mercy Brown, no one was saying Mercy Brown was evil. She was a vampire. And in fact, the people didn't use that word vampire. It was the outsiders who called it vampires. I mean, they weren't wrong. If you look at the larger tradition worldwide, that's what was going on. It was vampires. The people didn't understand it that way. It was a folk medical practice. So nobody was blaming the corpse that was identified as the one inhabiting the evil spirit, because that person's spirit had already gone where it was going to go. So it was just a vessel for this evil angel, this evil thing that was killing people sympathetically. So there was no belief that the corpse was actually coming out of the grave and bothering people, sucking their blood, biting their necks, all that stuff. No, it was draining their life, their blood, sympathetically from a distance.
Hmm.
That sympathetic magic is what James Fraser called it a long time ago.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned that this was an established folk practice to dig up the grave when something unusual happened. Was it in the US or maybe in Europe, was it used for other kinds of diseases, or were there
Yes,
things other than diseases that cause this practice to happen?
right, exactly. Here the way it became established, it was almost always associated with tuberculosis
Okay.
consumption. In the old world, it was any series of unexplained deaths, even if they were like accidents,
Huh.
people falling from a horse cart
Hmm.
and breaking a neck.
Yeah.
If it didn't seem like there was any natural cause, if you didn't hit a bump or something, you just
Yeah.
fell.
Huh.
But often it was associated with diseases or plagues
Okay.
that were
Huh.
taking people. And I was going to mention how I think it came here. Now, the first case I found is 1784. That's the earliest
Huh.
in Willington, Connecticut, which is north of Hartford.
Hmm.
And it's a newspaper article. It was actually a letter published in a newspaper from a town official in Willington. He said, I want to warn people in the community about this foreign quack doctor who is taking advantage of people and telling them he can cure consumption.
Oh.
And in fact, he had just goaded one of our fellow townsmen, Isaac Johnson, into digging up two of his dead children to
Oh.
try to stop this
Oof.
disease. So he said, I am trying to warn people. And then he went on and described the whole process.
Hmm.
So here we have a first person account of this happening in
Hmm.
1784, a foreign quack doctor.
Hmm.
So I think it probably came here maybe during the American Revolution
Hmm.
when the British had engaged uh, mercenaries called Hessians
Yeah.
to come here and fight. And all the Hessians, not all Hessians were actually Germans.
Hmm.
In fact, the country nation boundaries and lines and borders hadn't been firmly established.
Yeah.
There was, Poland was part of Germany, and so these mercenaries came from places in Europe where this vampire practice was being performed. And I'm sure many of them we know stayed here. Some of them were captured and remained here. And there was a whole tradition of itinerant healers in the Northeast going from one town to the next, selling cures. So they weren't doing this as an act of kindness. They were making money,
Yeah.
Right.
preying on people who were desperate, just like
Yeah.
you'd think they would be desperate when
Yeah.
medical science says, I can't do anything, then what are you going to do? So I think this practice came here, and then once it came here, maybe from several different sources at different times,
Mm.
it would become part of community tradition,
Yeah.
and that's why I think it became part of folklore, because we find variation in the rituals in different places. It becomes localized. So in some places they'll cut out the heart and the liver and burn it to ashes. Maybe feed the ashes to someone who was sick as a
Oh,
kind of cure.
yeah.
Edwin was supposed to have drunk the ashes in water or some medicine. Everett Peck said, I don't remember that stuff there.
Mm.
Maybe
Yeah.
he just didn't want to think about, Edwin consuming
Yeah.
body parts. So
Yeah.
basically, it is a form of cannibalism, if you will.
Mm.
But then there are other local variants of this tradition, especially in Maine. And I think this is really elegant. They would just turn the corpse upside down and rebury it.
Huh.
Right, because this whole tradition of the body has to be in a certain direction. So when um,
Mhm.
the resurrection comes, you can stand up and
Oh,
walk.
Mm.
sure. Head buried to the east, I think,
Mm.
Yeah, I
waiting for
just,
the, yeah. Well, and also, where the people were buried supine
Mm.
on their backs. So if you turn somebody upside down, you're inverting, the whole burial ritual.
yeah.
And then, and another way to look at it is it's like, well, the evil spirit is so stupid, it's just going to dig itself further into the grave instead of getting out of the grave.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. They have no sense of direction.
Right. And another variant, and sometimes these are combined in different ways. They were looking for a vine growing sometimes out of the breast or the heart of the corpse,
Whoa.
through the coffin. And in
Mm.
some cases, the belief was if that vine went out of the coffin and into another coffin of a relative, then another death in the family was going to
Oh,
occur.
sheesh. Yeah.
So the case in Wellington, Connecticut combined not only removing the vital organs, but also looking for a vine and cutting that vine. So you have
Mm.
Wow.
two of those variant practices
Wow.
together in Wellington.
Wow, this is all fascinating. And you pulled it together into a book,
Oh, yeah.
a
Two
couple of
books.
books.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was it was pretty well. I guess if you have a research addiction, it's
Mm.
like going to the casino and turning the roulette wheel. You say, event, I'm looking for these things. I'm doing keyword searches in old newspapers looking for like exhumation,
Uh,
uh, heart, superstition,
mm.
all these words. And I'll go through I'll get maybe 5,000 hits and I'll go through them one at a time.
Oh, boy.
And
Yeah.
eventually I
Eventually.
find one and think, wow.
Mm.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, it would never even occur to me. I just, to me, vampires was just mythology. But
Mhm.
you're talking about, really what you're talking about is how we deal with disasters and diseases and try to find cures and look for hope
Mm.
and look
Sure.
for a way beyond what's in front of
Yeah.
us.
Well, yes, I think that's perfectly correct. That it wasn't ignorant people performing barbaric superstitions, which is the way newspapers often treated it
Yeah.
Yeah.
in just those words.
Mm.
It was people trying to find a way to heal their families and their communities.
Yeah.
I mean, it was done out of love and
Right.
kindness.
Mm.
It wasn't they were trying to do some barbaric practice, and
No, no.
it was a last resort.
Mm.
because you can imagine how someone like George Brown would feel about having the bodies of his family
Yeah.
exhumed. Now, the
Yeah.
newspapers made a point and to say that George Brown and his son Edwin, who was very ill, did not were not present in the cemetery. They didn't. In fact, the newspaper said George Brown himself said I have no faith in this old time
Hmm.
remedy, is what he called it. I have no faith in this old time remedy. But he did it because other members of the extended family and other neighbors realized that this wouldn't stop with just him and his nuclear
Right,
family. It would spread out into the community. So
right.
it became a community issue. They put pressure on him to perform the ritual. And
Which
so
he
he gave
did.
in to them. He did,
As a
not
nice
because he
neighbor,
believed
he
it.
did it.
Exactly. I think
Wow.
he
And we can,
understood at that time that his role at that point was to try to be a healer, and he tried to enact that role the best he could.
yeah, that's really speaks to a lot of community relations now, right? We don't necessarily always do things just for ourselves. That's a really good point, Michael. This has been really interesting. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for
Yeah.
joining us. And to
Yeah.
hear Michael's work, please join us for his reading and Q&A during our November Arts Saturday. You can register through our website or on Eventbrite. His books can be purchased online from our bookstore. That is bookstore.org/shop/Drake Arts. This and all of our programs are available through the generosity of our many donors. Please consider becoming a donor yourself and thank these people for making this program possible. We look forward to seeing you during our November Arts Saturday.
Thanks, Diane. I look forward to it.
Mm.
And thank you, Tom
Oh,
and
you're very
Gay.
welcome. Thank you.
This and all our programs are archived on the Drake Arts YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/@Drake Arts. Thank you so much for watching.